I don't know how to describe it other than like a demon type of sound.
But it's silhouetted, hulking, every bit of 5.5 feet wide, 13 to 14 foot tall, pitch black.
The one thing that ran through my mind when I had this encounter was I don't have a big enough gun.
Your host, two-time witness and field researcher for more than 40 years, William Jevning. Welcome to Creek Devil.
Welcome to the Q&A, everyone. Before we get going, I wanted to mention, people are really liking the Mr. Black piece. We've only done the first part so far, and for those listening to it, what he's doing in this, a lot of this first, not just the first segment, the first 2 hours we recorded him, he was kind of giving the foundation of all of this, how he gotten into it and things he learned, etc. But so that's kind of what's going on with that. And for the few people that have mentioned that I'm Mr. Black, I am not Mr. Black. Sorry to let you know that. I'm not. That is not me on the recording. I'm trying to think, Tom, if there was something else we needed to address on that.
Well, I think maybe the impetus for that was that we had our guy in Hollywood do the basically the alteration, voice alteration, and it was just kind of a broad sweep. It caught me, it caught all of us.
Right.
So
yeah, well, and
I can guarantee you, I'm not Mr. Black either.
Well, I've edited our voices out.
Okay.
So, there was something else. Somebody complained that, why did we have to disguise his voice? That was per his request. And you have to understand that, he's still sort of in a position, in fact, very much in a position where, if the people he worked for or the people who currently handle this stuff were to find out he was talking, he'd have a great deal of problems. So
yeah, it's a prudent measure. Right.
That was per his request. He doesn't want to be identified, and he can be identified by his voice with these people. So that's the reason his voice is disguised. So anyway, having said that, we'll be posting the next segment this weekend. And I guess we're ready for the questions, Tom.
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. I want to say one thing. Because his voice is disguised, you got two choices. No Mr. Black whatsoever, or Mr. Black with a disguised voice. I think people would go for the latter. The other thing I want to say real quick is keep the questions coming. Questions@creekdevil.com. You guys keep the show going. There are no bad questions. We love them all. And so again, questions@creekdevil.com. If we've earned your trust, if you think we've earned it, give us a like and a subscribe. And if you want to support us, you can do so for as little as $1 a show. Excuse me, not $1 a show.
A month.
That'd be great. No, as little as $1 a month, and it really does help us with our research.
I do want to mention before you start, Tom. I want to mention each time we record is the piece, the project we're working on. If anybody out there knows of someone, whether it's your family, somebody else's family, or friends, they've had someone that's vanished, whether they went on a hike or whatever, and they just disappeared out in the wilderness, and they suspect that it might have been one of these creatures, to contact us, please, and we'll let you know once you do why we're asking this. It's not for the show, it's not for a book or anything like that, but it could greatly help, because it's something that involves a much wider exposure, and maybe help get some answers as to why that person disappeared. Alrighty, I think we're done with our announcements. Let's go ahead and dive into the questions.
All right, so we have a great one here from Janice. And Janice, I like this one. This is fantastic. It's one that I've wondered about because it makes sense. And so here it is. If Sasquatch likes to stay elusive, why do they tap on windows late at night? And I want to expand that a little bit to a lot of the things that they do seems to contradict the fact that they want to remain hidden. You know, the screaming, the howls, and the sightings. So, Will, I'm going to start off. I'm going to throw this one in your lap. What are your thoughts?
Well, again, okay, everybody wants a blanket answer for something, and it's not that simple. Nothing is that simple in life. It's very difficult to just throw a blanket statement at something and then have it stick every single occurrence. Yes, they do typically stay away from people, but not always. When they're doing something on a window like that, they're trying to elicit a response from the people in the house. They're trying to get them to come out. Maybe they're trying to see how many people are there. They're trying to get a response from people.
So what you're saying is there's an exception to every rule.
Yeah, and it's not even a general. I mean, those are kind of apples and oranges. Yes, they generally stay away from people and where areas where people are active, but you know, when it comes to going after food, and again, they're not all the same temperament, same mindset, all that stuff. It's just like people. You know, no two are exactly the same in their behavior or temperament.
Well, I want to throw another thing in there, and this goes back to the request you made a moment ago, and that is, between the three of us here, there's no doubt, we don't have any question whatsoever that these things can be malevolent, and they do take people. And one of the thoughts in my mind is, hey, if you're trying to remain elusive and you want to stay undiscovered, the last thing in the world you want to do is take a person, because that sends humans out like bees looking for that person.
That's correct. But you have to understand too, you know, with all the different variants, there's different attitudes among those variants. In other words, some of them are you know, of the mindset they're going to just stay away from people. There are others that are very aggressive, and the aggressive ones aren't necessarily going to be shy around people. And Forrest, I'm sure you're probably thinking of other primate groups that have very similar kinds of behaviors.
Certainly. And I will put out a disclaimer right here and now. Neither am I, Mr. Black. Okay, moving right along. Anyway, look at humans. We have serial killers. We have murderers. We have people that are divas that want to attract attention to themselves, that do things to attract attention to themselves. So there is a perfect prime example right there. There's other people that want to be reclusive. They just want to be left alone. Don't bother me. The same thing is exhibited in almost every primate group out there. And they're all different personalities. And that's what makes them, and you know, you really find that in all mammalian groups. I mean, cats, dogs, whatever. That's why you have different personalities and, you know, breeds of dogs that are very aggressive, while you have breeds of dogs that are very, very passive. So I think this applies to Bigfoot as well. I don't think they're exclusive in their behavior any more than any other mammalian group or primate group or human group is exclusive in theirs. So I think that you're going to have those guys out there that we might even classify as serial killers among Bigfoot. And you know what? I think I have brought this to the forefront before. There was a chimpanzee, a male rogue chimpanzee, and I want to say Uganda, but I may be wrong on the country there, but it was in Africa, that was actually going into homes and stealing children, killing them, and eating them. They would also there were women that they had killed that had gone out in the forest for whatever reason to, you know, gather food or whatever. And this big chimpanzee had killed him. He had a history of killing humans, both females and children. Does this sound like a familiar story?
Wow. Scary.
Human, well, yes. Females and children are going to be easier prey. And this chimpanzee figured this out, and he was killing them and consuming them. They actually had to organize a hunt, and they actually found him, and they killed him. We hear this sometimes with Bigfoot and some of the historical accounts that Bigfoot have gone out there and were taking indigenous people, the females and the children from the different tribes. I mean, this is again, this is a broad spectrum across almost all indigenous peoples from the East Coast to the West Coast, up into Canada, up into Alaska. They may go by different names, but their behavior is almost always the same. And like I say, human, women, and children are going to be easier to take than an armed, grown man. So,
and you see it among other predators in the wild. They'll go after the easiest targets, the young and the sick, typically.
The weak, yes, the sick and the weak.
Right. So, and I've had, and I can off the top of my head think of 3 or 4 cases in the past couple of years where people have contacted me, and one of those was from Australia. And the people were just beside themselves with fear because these creatures were encroaching on their homes, and they wanted to know what to do to get rid of them because the behavior was consistently ramping up in aggression. And one of the families moved away. I think that was the folks in Australia. And the other ones, I sent them a few measures to do. They did those, and the creatures left. So, yes, they typically, will try to stay away from humans, but we have these other ones that do these things. So, when they come up and smack the side of a window or the house, like I said, they're trying to get a response out of the people in the house.
Well, why would you come shake an air conditioner in a cabin? Why do you come up to a window, an open window, and just growl and,
testing the waters.
Yeah, I mean, they are bound to know that I live out here by myself. Mm-hmm. There's nothing but my cats, my dogs, and my horses with me. So are they trying to get me to come out of the house? I actually thought about that night, and I told y'all that when they were he was shaking the air conditioner. I thought, maybe I grabbed that shotgun. I was going to go out and fire it off, and I thought, maybe I better not do that. I better not do that.
I watched a show one time. We like to watch the ID channel once in a while, the murder and mayhem shows, and there was one when they were talking about serial killers, and it was somebody, I think, with the FBI or profiler, and they were talking about their patterns. And they would start with when they were children, young children, these people, and they would give examples of their behaviors and things that were different than, quote unquote normal kids. That was kind of like they had a predisposition for that behavior, or what led them to that behavior. And it wasn't like once they got to be an adult, boom, they were in an instant serial killer. It was a series, growing up and getting into doing that, where they would test the waters, just kind of see what they could get away with. And it oftentimes would take years before they would get to the point where, they would learn certain behaviors that were successful, and then they would, that's when they were really prolific killers. But I think these things are very similar in that aspect, where when they're doing things like on your property, jiggling the air conditioner or doing things to the windows or whatever, or growling next to the window, they're testing the waters. They're not experienced enough yet, but they have a tendency towards that behavior. They're moving in that direction.
Well, and it's not being very inconspicuous.
No, well,
doing that, growling and tapping on windows, and grabbing the air conditioner.
They're beyond that point. They're beyond the point of being that careful. They're moving into that situation where, okay, well, nobody's bothering me yet, so I'm going to continue doing this. And as they gain a feeling of comfort or success in the things they're doing, then those things will increase and change. They'll become more aggressive.
So
if
it's like building confidence.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a building blocks towards that eventual behavior.
So if somebody is experiencing the creatures on their property and they're tapping on the windows, doing whatever,
It's probably not a good thing.
that's a big red flag.
It is a big red flag, and that's where you want to start employing some of these measures. Like we talked about motion sensor lights. You want to change up your routines. Pour bleach around the property. You know, the creature that has the strongest odor in nature is the biggest, baddest thing on the spot, right? So you don't want them to think that your property is their territory. You want to establish that.
All right, Roger has a question. He wants to know, and this is actually a good one because we've talked about the speed at which these things run, but he wants to know what kind of endurance. How far could one of these things run? Can they run? Could they, do that 45 miles an hour for, say, a 20-mile stint, or do we have any thoughts on that?
That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because I had that on my list. Something we talked about before we started recording. We've talked a number of times about their speed, and we can get into that in a moment because we have several examples. But one of the things I hadn't thought about this either is how far can they run? And like I said, we talked about this before. I read an article on Forest. You're familiar with this too. Humans are kind of unique among primate species because we're designed to run, not fast necessarily, but we can run for long time periods because of the way we sweat and things like that. We can run long distances, and our ancestors probably ran prey, into the ground to where they just couldn't breathe anymore or whatever because they were exhausted, where humans can do that. But the Sasquatch isn't designed the same we are. I mean, our seemingly lack of hair and things like that are partly why we can do what we do. And the Sasquatch just isn't designed that way. Forrest, what do you think?
Well, you're exactly correct, and another point that I've made in the past is the people of the Kalahari Desert, they still actually hunt in that fashion even today. They literally run their prey down. I mean, you will out there watch them running antelope, and they run them and run them and run them until the prey is just utterly exhausted. And it's very similar to the way you've seen African dogs hunt too. And even wolves do this. They will run their prey until it's tired, and then they will attack it. So it's not just the human species that does this, but other predators as well. But we are, just like you said, we are designed for marathon running. I mean, we have hair all over our bodies that it's a very fine hair. It's like a down on our bodies, and it's just as much as the other apes and monkeys, but certainly not as long. And for that reason, and then we have the ability to, like I said too, we were talking previously before the show, apes and monkeys do sweat to a certain extent, not to the extent that we do. And that sweating ability is what provides us with this ability to be marathon runners, because it acts as a cooling agent for us. And so we can run tirelessly. In fact, and the fact that we have a static foot as well is a basis for our ability to be a marathon runner. We don't have that mid-dorsal break like all the other apes do, so including Bigfoot. And so we have a static foot, and so we have that ability to run long distances.
I would suspect that if a Sasquatch were running after you but not necessarily trying to catch you, we could probably outrun them.
But I don't want to test that theory.
No.
Oh, come on, Tom.
Well, I mean...
Well, here's another question, and actually this is one that a listener sent in, and that is, and it dovetails into this discussion, and that is, what kind of a range do they have? Because I've heard it mentioned that they, on a nightly basis, when they're out hunting, They go from the high elevation to the low elevation. And Will, I'm thinking of the area that we were at in July. That's 20 miles just to get from the high elevation where we
that's
know
that's
that they
not unusual.
were hanging out at.
That's not unusual.
Okay.
Now, what do they mean by
but
range?
There's a lot of valleys and stuff like that. So they must have endurance. Maybe they're not running, but
for walking endurance, certainly. I mean, they're kind of designed for that, especially the ones, and you have to look at them, the variation by variation where and it depends on where they are. And that's what Mr. Black talked about at the end of that first segment we posted. And I can't remember if he discussed more of that or not. And we can go into more of that with him. And again, before we continue, if you have questions for Mr. Black, send them to us because he wants listener questions for one of the next times we record him. We're going to record a number of times with him about different topics that he was privy to. But send us your questions. So anyway, they're like in the Northwest where we are. It's mountainous, and they're bulkier. They're built very heavy, very sturdy, and it's they're designed for that mountainous terrain, or they've adapted to it, I should say. Whereas other ones, let's say like we talked about east of the mountains, they're leaner and they're built for more open country running. Now, how far they can run? Well, being leaner, maybe they can run farther, that particular variant, but I still suspect they're going to use that quick burst of speed rather than any distance running to catch prey.
Well, and we also strongly suspect that they're an ambush predator, or talk about tool use, they're going to either break your legs or smash your skull in with rocks or large trees or something like that.
Yeah, I found evidence of them being ambush predators. So, that was something I wanted to bring up about Mr. Black too. Was somebody asked, and I was pretty sure I mentioned it in the opening introduction we did for that segment, that he actually has shown me things that I was able to go verify who he is and where he did his work and everything. So if anybody has questions about that, yes, I was able to verify him. Okay.
Yeah, no, you did mention that he is who he says he is. He's telling the truth.
Some people don't pay attention to things when they're, we talk about it on the recording, and you should go back and listen to it because we did address that. Okay.
Well, what we were talking about, I think before we started the recording, when I was telling you about the story in Oregon is kind of a prime example of their speed. And I had actually, this was a sighting that was done along the Columbia River Gorge there. And that highway there is a 4-lane highway. And this thing was literally running along the side of the highway. It was sighted by multiple law enforcement, as well as, that is a very busy highway as well, Tom and Will. This thing was literally running along the shoulder of the road, and these kids were looking up at the thing, and they said that they were traveling around 45, 50 miles an hour. And it was keeping up with these cars and managed to get itself across 4 lanes of traffic. And now, law enforcement saw it too, so it wasn't just people, the average Joe citizen saying that I saw this. And then after it had run all this, all this distance, and it was just right outside of Portland. It wasn't out in the countryside down, out there in the Columbia Gorge. It then got off the road and then went and jumped into the Columbia River. So,
right, which,
and started swimming.
In that area, they swim across there frequently. But I have 2 other cases. One's law enforcement. The other was Lee that we had on the show a while back. And Lee was up near the town of Willits in Northern California here. And he saw one of the creatures running across this open pasture. Now, there were fence posts there. He took me to the place and showed me. And he started clocking it from this one particular post, and then he stopped clocking it, and it ran, I don't know how far, 100 yards probably, to where he stopped clocking it, and I guess he couldn't see it much after that. So he calculated based on how long it took the creature, and he went out and measured the distance between those two posts, and the figure came out to 45 miles an hour. And Lieutenant Pete, if you're listening, it was a couple of your canine officers. We talked to one of them, or we talked to you years ago. I can't remember who did the interview, but they were going from this was two deputy sheriffs, canine officers, two police units. They each had their dog in each vehicle, and they were going from Odessa, Texas to another area to do some work. And they were cruising pretty fast on this particular night. I think they estimated around 80 miles an hour. And I believe it was the lead vehicle saw this movement coming diagonally towards his cruiser from out in this open field. And it was on all fours and actually paced him for a few moments before it veered off. And he felt, I don't know that he was actually looking at the speedometer. He thought he was doing about 80, and this thing paced him for a few moments and then veered off. So there's a couple of examples right there.
Yeah, and I think, what is it, the fastest human, that gentleman from Jamaica, is like been clocked at 28 miles an hour.
Yeah, just a little under that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what a human can run. So obviously they could outrun a human at a short distance. Now I would question whether they are a long distance. Being able to keep that up at a long distance. I would question that.
Yeah, I would suspect they're not. I don't think they're built for it.
No, I don't think so either.
And then, and Will, you said something earlier that maybe some of the other variations are, the different varieties. Maybe they are, they're leaner.
Yeah, I mean,
the ones in the Midwest.
It could be that they're, those particular types are maybe evolving more towards being able to do that. I still don't think they have the capabilities that humans do, though.
Yeah, long distance. We got one. Do we have time for?
We have time for one more.
All right, this is, and I like this one. Kareem has sent us some great questions. Kareem, keep them coming. They're very interesting. And I don't know about this, but Kareem says, have you seen the skulls of Paracos that are studied by Brian Forrester? This person said he's chatted with Brian Forrester. He says, Baracus. Okay, I'm glad you're here for us because I thought you might know. It says, if you look at those elongated skulls, they have a different structure than human, and they're only two plates of bones. Okay, not like human skulls. So I think the question here is, could these be, they're being promoted as being alien skulls, but could they possibly be a Bigfoot skull or related to something, one of the Bigfoot varieties?
Okay. I'm going to say no to all the above. They don't, the sagittal suture, which is the suture that runs down the middle of the skull, seems to be lacking in a lot of these skulls. That could be to the fact that these skulls, I'm not ever having personally seen one. I've seen plenty of pictures of ones, but the Paracas skulls, they actually have done some DNA work on some of those skulls, and believe it or not, they test out to be, a lot of them have been showing up as being Indo-European in their DNA, which would mean they come from across the waters. And this does not surprise me because there have been a lot of Salutrian points and stuff being found on the East Coast that we never even knew about. When I went to school, this was something that was never even talked about because everybody came across the Bering Straits and yada, yada, yada. Now they're even, I actually watched a program last night where they were actually talking about people that they were finding sites down in the far tips of the southernmost region of South America that were actually older sites than the sites up in up in the Bering Straits. So there was a lot of those people were getting around in those days, and a lot more than what we think
A lot more seafaring.
they were. So, yes, and you know what? People don't give credit to just because you're a primitive. What we perceive as being primitive doesn't necessarily mean that these people didn't have the capacity to want to discover new things and do new things, and they just
Well, you know what gets
did
me?
it in a different fashion.
What gets me is
did it in a different fashion.
Human beings have been around for a long time, and they have the same brain, or had the same brain we have.
Exactly.
So why would they be that primitive for tens of thousands of years? Then what? All of a sudden we get civilization? It just doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, it doesn't, and that's why. Even though back to the Paracas skulls, I don't think the Paracas skulls are alien. I don't. Again, my opinion, folks. My opinion. I don't think that they're alien. I don't think that they're Bigfoot. They don't exhibit anything than the features other than the high vault of the cranial, skull. It hasn't changed anything of the capacity of the brain inside. So nothing has changed other than the shape. This could be from cradle board deformation. A lot of societies, indigenous societies here in North America and South America, did cradle board deformation of the skull. There are still African tribes that still do cradle board and wrapped heads of infants so that they will have skull deformation.
Yeah,
they find that attractive. That is their culture. More power to them. I'm not going to do that to my kids or my grandkids. So
yeah, those skulls aren't either big enough nor robust enough to be Sasquatch.
Oh no way. And you don't see any type of sagittal crest to support a massive jaw or anything like that up there. That's a great question, but that's. I'm going to say no, that's not anything that would be related to a Bigfoot. They're completely human. And like I say, the few ones that have been tested have turned out to be Indo-European. So that puts a whole new spin on South American culture. So,
Okay. And it is a great question. And I like it because it's so different. It's out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
This Kareem also, real quick, I'm just going to throw this in. It said many of the skulls were found on mummified bodies. They had brown to reddish hair on them, and they have strange teeth and molars. Even in their juvenile or baby mummies, have full-grown molars. Very strange. So
yes, they do. They do exhibit a lot of peculiarities. And then you have to remember too, we've also got the Loveland skulls in Nevada, and I actually had a professor at my university that actually had seen those, and actually some of them can be. There is a segment of ancient aliens, and I don't remember which one it was, but they did allow one of the archaeologists to go in there and look at these. They're actually in 2 or 3 different locations. They're at I believe the University of Nevada, and they may be in Arizona. And I think they've got a couple of them out in California. But those had reddish and blonde hair on these skulls, and they also exhibited the large vaulted, some of them, not all of them, the large vaulted skulls, and yet even the normal average skulls that had no deformation at all to the skulls set up next to a regular human skull, just yours or mine, set up next to them, they're almost twice the size of a human skull. And they did say that some of these did exhibit the extra rows of teeth and, some really strange, peculiar dental formations, too. So,
okay. Well, we're out of time, folks. So this is where we're going to end, and join us for the next episode we put out.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Creek Devil. If you or anyone you know has had an encounter with these creatures, please contact us at williamjevning@yahoo.com. That's William, Jevning, @yahoo.com. All communication is confidential. Join us for another program next week. And until then, keep your eyes open out